Podcasts proudly presents The Broadcasters Podcast, a weekly media commentary talking about traditional and digital media headlines and talking to the content creators out front and behind the scenes. Here is the king of podcasts. Greetings and salutations. Thanks for joining me for another Broadcasters Podcast here. Really do appreciate all of you for checking out the show during this confinement time during the pandemic, which we're going to just be calling it that because I don't want to keep referring to the virus. I do a lot because it is something to be said, but when I think about all the things that are changing around because we are still trying to go ahead and adjust and adapt to confinement and to some of the casual, some of the luxuries that we've normally had, are we taking any of it for granted? The fact that we could go to a sporting event or a concert or a movie and go out, in public could go out, go to dinner and really just have time to be, in recreation, enjoying ourselves, just having a good time. I know people are missing that right now. And I know people that are really missing all of it because it's the comforts, right? It's the things that we do to, help ourselves relieve our stress and sometimes escape from the everyday life, the everyday grind. But the everyday grind is not what it is right now. Everything has just felt, it's an alternate universe, it feels like. And I know that feeling too. But, for what it's worth, I just know that the people that are trying to entertain us are not doing a good job of it. And the people that are trying to inform us are definitely not doing a good job of that either. In my own opinion, when I look at the things that are going on, when it comes to the way that our information is being gathered right now, the kind of reporting that's being done by the establishment, okay, the media establishment that's out there, in all, there's a real thing to be said about what we're getting in terms of content. A lot of programming we do get now these days, if you're looking at Netflix, if you're looking at, some of the movies that have come out, the movies that came out most recently have been very, been scary, kind of dystopian-like. But then when you start feeling what the movies were like, and then we're starting to feel a little bit, some people feel like it's a little bit of real life coming in, like a real life Purge, a real life Contagion, a real life World War Z. I get that part, but it really isn't. When I think about what the news is giving us, the journalists are offering to us, it's hard to find rays and glimmers of hope. It's hard to find, and that goes across the board. And I'm not talking about anything political. And I'm sure all of you, when you hear news media, you're like, okay, you're this side of the aisle, you're on this side of the aisle, you're in the middle, you're wherever. Look, my whole point, and I've said this many times before, is that I want two types of news. News is supposed to be news, entertainment, weather, and sports. Those four things together. But news also is the news itself. Plus, you have, when it comes down to, all of the questions that must be answered to give us facts and figures. Give us the nuts and bolts of a story. Who, what, when, where, and why. And then opinion editorial, of course, you can have that. But we get so much of that now that is cluttered. And it's obvious it's out there. And I bring up a lot of stories that bring this up. I have quoted a foreign policy article that talked about that. I've talked about recently the Harvard Business Review put out a story about that. And they talked about that local journalism is failing in the United States. And many of us learn in school that a free society requires a free press. But we really reflect on what that actually means to lose the fourth estate. So what's happening is, and I mentioned this in the story, is that the demise of local newspapers. So local coverage, which local news does a great job of, okay? Still by far the main source of original reporting in their communities. It's also linking to a rise in local corruption and increase in polarization as news consumers rely more on partisan-inflected national outlets for their information. The Harvard Business Review did that. And I imagine, they're not necessarily any way, I don't know how you can put it, but Harvard Business Review, for them to put a story out that talks about that, with the lack of foreign journalism, I bring that up tonight as part one of the interview that I did recently with Kristen L. Pope. She's an award-winning broadcast journalist and CEO of Pope Productions. And I talked to her in the first part of in the first part of my interview, which is coming up a little bit later on. I talked to her about that, and I also talked to her about something I'm bringing up from foreignpolicy.com. Again, we know the response of the news coverage we're getting from mainstream established media is negative. It's across the board. And the digital disruption really hurt this. We know that. That's why a lot of news outlets have fallen by the wayside. Newspapers the same way. The disruptions continued. And we've talked about that extensively here on the program. But when it comes to the news media, it's hurt a lot. This is one of the last bastions of opportunity that they have. And it's unfortunate for every news outlet to compete against each other instead of serving the good interest of the public to report the news. But all your established media outlets, they're looking to make money. Their business is just like anybody else. So are they really in the best interest of what's going on for the public? Not necessarily. And it wasn't like that as bad before, but it is now. I mean, news, because here's the thing. It's a couple different things. From the disruption of the news media, right? The establishment media, just like the establishment, everything. Okay, the recording industry establishment, the television establishment, the radio establishment, right? All those things, the way things used to be, the disruption, people don't handle it that well. And what happens normally is you have a lot of outlets that go by the wayside and become antiquated. Well, the music industry and their method of selling units of music is antiquated and it's gone. They're never going to get it back. So the music industry doesn't make the kind of money it used to anymore. And they're also conglomerated. The same thing with radio. That's where you have a couple of major companies that are, they're cringing. They are hemorrhaging in cash. And especially during this pandemic, they are hurting right now altogether. Like, are they going to be able to survive? Will they lose money altogether? Like, that's a problem they're going to have as well. And then you look at the movie theaters. Look at what's going on with that. Okay, not only did you have the disruption of streaming outlets like Netflix and Disney Plus and HBO Max and Peacock coming up and others. Well, then you got to say to yourself this thing, like, look, people, there's still a fight to try to keep people to go to the box office on the old model. But there's a lot of things about that old model that still work. Okay. The model is still kind of steadfast where if it's a new movie you want to go see, you can see it in the theater. The experience is still great. But that is taking a hit now. But there's not much they can do to fight back because they're in a tough spot. Nobody can go to the theaters. And they have no choice but to go ahead and shut down. And AMC theaters might go to bankruptcy. We'll talk about that in a few minutes. But the news media, the news establishment, the television, some people are starting to engage back in television a little bit. But not that much. Okay, Modern Family, for example, they had their series finale come up. For that night's viewing, they got 7 million viewers. I don't know what they got in the beginning, but I'm sure they got much more than that when they first started. When I look at what that show went through, okay, and you look at the amount of time that show was on the air, 2009 it came on. And if I go through and I check out of 11 seasons and 247 episodes, what they did when it came to their ratings, I'll tell you what the ratings were. At the beginning, they were pulling in 10 million viewers. And they pulled in 10 million viewers for the first 5 seasons they were on. And then basically that digital disruption hit right around 2014. Because they were one of the big, the real gauges of where programming was going on, right? So there you go. Actually, they were getting 12 million viewers up to 14 million viewers by 2012. And then 2012, we started seeing a decrease in programming. Because as we saw, it dropped to 11 million viewers in 2013, 2014, and it would continue to drop. Okay, it went down to 9 million viewers in 2015, 8 million in 2016, 7 million in 2017, 5 million in 2018, and 4 million. So they doubled their viewership on their last episode last night. So for their very last episode, they had almost half their audience from the beginning. They had half of their original audience. Now, could that be a regression because of the fact that they didn't have as many episodes as they did before? Because it wasn't as good before? Like, you could say that the show might have run out of steam, right? But you think about that. that's not much for a show. There's only a handful of shows now that get 10 million viewers at all. It wasn't that long ago that an NCIS could pull in 25 million viewers. But disruption changes things. Now, at the moment, in the same way that a natural disaster happens, radio will serve a purpose. And so they're going to make advantage of getting different hurricane, for hurricanes is always like shutter companies or impact windows and doors or insurance companies or car companies or home insurance, like all that. You're going to have all these different companies that are come on board, your supermarkets, your gas stations, your drugstores. You're going to see all these different people come on board to promote. But then during the middle of all this, we're actually getting accurate information. National Weather Service, National Hurricane Center, pretty reliable when it comes to disasters. Now, there is the local news that will cover the story, and they might hype it up a little bit because they're trying to keep people to watch TV. But that's a smaller extent. It's a smaller audience. But remember, look at when you look at the national establishment media. When they take a story like this, a natural disaster, right? It's doom and gloom. Any thoughts of any kind of therapeutics or treatments, like they don't talk about what's our light at the end of the tunnel. Where is the glimmer of hope? Where is, us getting to the top of the hill and seeing the other side? There's none of that. See, the news at the moment, the news directors, the people that are publishing, they don't want that. They think that the idea of to keep people in a suspension of fear and horror is what's going to sell. And I guess it might be working for some, but honestly, that's the thought process they want. Now, can it be politically motivated? Absolutely. On both sides, as a matter of fact. There's politics going to be a part of this anyway, because the government is part of the entity that's going to try to help us get out of this pandemic. But when it comes to the media arm, the fourth estate, the way they're handling things, there is an entitlement that goes on with the people that are here. They're not middle America, and they can't relate to their viewers. They really can't. These are people that also mostly are multimillionaires through and through. They have their particular cliques and their kind of fraternity, sorority type atmosphere where they are embedded in Washington, D.C., New York, Los Angeles. They have their bureaus, but they really are kind of just stuck to their ways. And there is a real smugness in the air. There's a feeling of, well, we're going to talk to everyday people, but they're not everyday people. They're different. When they get have somebody there to give them makeup and hairstyle and give them clothes and give them the wardrobe they need to go on the air because it's going to be on camera. That's something special to them. Or that they're reporters and they go on Twitter and they have a large following. Oh, they have a blue check mark next to them. They're somebody special. They're privileged. They're entitled. So then there's an aura and an authority, and there's a feel of, oh, well, you should listen to me. I'm an authority. I know what I'm doing. So it's more about the personality and more about what that person identifies as opposed to what have you done for us? Where's your reporting? Show us your burden of proof. Show us your portfolio, if you will. Now, some people, they definitely have that, but then also when they've changed what they've done before, then you see a change in the persona when you are into the establishment itself. Like, I see a lot of people that were formerly war correspondents, right? I mean, you look at Anderson Cooper, Martha Raddatz, they changed themselves. But then again, Anderson Cooper might have been out in the field. You might have gone to, certain areas and done a lot of great reporting. But let's be honest. I mean, he is attached to the Vanderbilt estate, the Vanderbilt fortune, right? I mean, he had a silver spoon. Martha Raddatz, into the Washington establishment, when you're in that space for decades upon decades, yes, you're going to be entrenched. And you know what? You're not the same person you are anymore. Celebrity, politics, that all changes you. We all know that. So again, we don't talk too much about the talent, the people that are behind the camera, behind the microphone too much. We do. We respect. We appreciate where you've come from. But when you lose yourself in the process, maybe it's not so much because they want to do it. It's because their superiors want it. Corporate greed is a malfeasance. There's a thing where there are people that are saying, listen, I don't care how you make the money. You need to make us money. You need to make this outfit profitable. So some people feel like there's a certain way we need to do things in order to profit. And now it's by whatever means necessary. It's not even to do it with any kind of I'm not going to say morality, but integrity or reputation. That reputation and integrity are thrown aside as long as you're doing what it takes by whatever means necessary to be able to go ahead and make money for where you're at. So you're not even a person that's just providing content. Now you're a salesperson. You are a manipulator. You are someone that has to help monetize. You have to be able to go and bring people in and keep people engaged because it's your brand. It's your position. You have to make yourself important because no matter what, even if you're not at that job anymore, you're going to go somewhere else because you will have connections. You will know people. People will be familiar with you and you will get paid handsomely. Or lovely if you're a woman. And that's what's going to happen. So the media establishment has their own thing. And I put out a headline much like what the news establishment media did. Yes, I absolutely did that. I am not denying that. You know why? Because it's clickbait. It's attention bait. I want to prove my point. Now, do I have to do that? No, but I did. I figured, why not? I'll make my point here. See what happens. Media establishment pumping out panic to profit on pandemic? We should be allowed to have that debate. Free speech is very important to me. I am a thumping First Amendment advocate for anybody that wants to have it. Now, I've always been told that the philosopher Voltaire was best known to have said, I can agree to disagree with you, but I will fight to the death for your right to disagree. And that's how I believe. That's really how I feel. So regardless, I don't want speech or hate speech that's going to be violent or that's just going to cause harm to anyone. No. But I want people to be able to again have their freedom of opinion, freedom of thought. I've said this before, and it's without saying here. At this point, I've become very skeptical of journalism. And you've heard me with other guests feel the same way. And I can't help myself but feel like that because I'm not satisfied. And there's a thing where you are projecting as a media establishment, you're projecting to a mass audience. So the other thing is, I can understand you don't want to get into the granularity of things. You don't want to go ahead and really break down things to make it meaningful. You have airtime. You can break down things to make it much easier for people to understand. Like if you wanted to take time during your network schedule, not run reruns and let the news kind of take over a little bit and inform people what's going on. Get them at ease. Keep them comfortable. Keep them calm. They're not going anywhere. They're going to watch your channel. So why are you going to scare them for? What good does that do? That's a major problem. And that's what I have an issue with. And so I had a wonderful conversation with Kristen L. Pope, award-winning broadcast journalist, CEO of Pope Productions. I really enjoyed my conversation with her. And the truth was, we had a couple of things that we were not on the same page with. And I wasn't saying that she was wrong. Not at all. My thing is that I felt different about certain things. One of the things was, about how we handle this as a country. Well, the idea is, okay, there is the medical crisis. There's the crisis to make sure that lives are saved. As many lives as possible can be saved. It's inevitable. Nothing is inevitable. That's what the president said. And then we're here, and now we're trying to make collectively people together with what we're doing as a people and what government's trying to do and what, Federal Reserve Bank and what other people are trying to do, business owners. All together as a collective, we need to be able to be as one and try to get ourselves through this and then rectify and adjudicate everything else after the fact. But when it comes down to it, everyone needs to be on the same page of being more constructive and less critical. But there's criticism that's being thrown out all over the place when it's not a time for it. We need to have the dialogue now about how to get our country working again, get ourselves back to where we want to be. Because I know a lot of people out there, I'm pretty sure, Everyone wants to get back to normal life. We're not going to get all the way back there. We're going to have some changes, obviously. But getting back to my original point, the comforts, the things we did casually, recreationally, to enjoy ourselves, to pass the time, to escape, to disengage from the everyday grind. You know, baseball game, concert, festival, going out for a drink, whatever you like to do when you would like to go out. Go out and do something, spend some hard-earned money and do something. Me, it was always the theater, always the movie theater. I like the Cineplex. I like going to my Regal Theater. I don't like the fact that I haven't been able to go for 3.5 weeks, but here we are. I don't like the fact we don't have a whole lot of new movies to watch either. We do, but nothing I'm going to go for because a lot of the good movies are being pushed back. We've talked about it here on the show. Those kind of things right now are what is concerning, and we're just in a tough spot. It's where we are today. So as a broadcaster, I want to make sure that everyone out there, they can find a way to do their own part. If you're a writer, a screenwriter, you want to do screenplays, you know what? We're going to get movies put together about the pandemic. This is a time to be very creative. This is a time to really kind of take yourself and find new things to go out there. Let's get rid of the reboots, get rid of the remakes. Let's not just do the same old thing. Being detached and having time to think and ponder what else could we be doing with ourselves to entertain, inform, educate, and to bring enjoyment, bring laughter, bring tears of joy to our eyes. Like the things that offer, that really play on our emotions, play on our senses. We want to get back to that again. We all want that. But as broadcasters, we can do that. And as a media industry, we need to be responsible and accountable for what we're doing. Okay? And my thing is, I think there's some media establishment out there that has not been doing the right thing. They've been nefarious. Okay? They've been nefarious, and they have been unapologetic for doing it. We need accurate. We need accuracy. We need consistency. We need granularity. We need all of that. We need to have people, you know, the best of media needs to know what they're doing. And it's unfortunate that the disruption continues to change things. So the disruption, honestly, the best news reporting, the best investigative reporting, the best I'm seeing right now is online. All I have to do is go to YouTube and Twitter. And I'm seeing people doing some amazing documentaries and reports that are doing the work that the major news outlets have. They have an apparatus. They have the resources. They have the wherewithal, the manpower, the money to be doing real good work. But they're not. And you can't tell me it's just about the pandemic and it's because, everybody needs to be staying inside. No. You know, you have the resources. You have your local news outlets you can go to that can be reporting on things for you. And the outlets need to be made available for them. The airtime needs to be made available. Like, I don't care about fair time when it comes to, you know, politics, but fair access. I want there to be access for everybody to get on if there's something to be said and they have the money and the wherewithal to go ahead and put out good, positive, or negative, but credible, accurate, well-sourced information. That's what's important. We have to have more of that. So I'm going to do something that's a little bit different than I normally would do. I'm going to move the interview portion up to now because I want to go ahead and allow you to hear the first part of my conversation when it comes to the overall state of journalism from the local to the national level. I want to go ahead and play the first part of my interview with Kristen L. Pope. And here it is for you all to listen to here on the Broadcasters Podcast. You should expect nothing less from yours truly, King of Podcasts, when it comes to me having a very standard criticism, I think a healthy criticism of the media and journalism in general. And that's what the focus of the program has been since I started it. And I want to just say this before I bring on my next guest. I want to just always say, and I've been making this a mantra of myself, and so I'm being more constructive and less critical. My whole thing is just that whatever I go ahead and say when it comes to how journalism is being instituted today. And I'm saying there's a lot of great reporters out there, a lot of great journalists that are still out there doing things proper. But there are obstacles in the way, and there are agendas from people higher up than those journalists that are not doing the best for the general public. And this is where I come from today. I am very pleased to have a great guest on to go ahead and talk about things just like that. I'm a broadcast journalist. She's worked as a general assignment reporter for Emmy Award Winning News 12 Westchester, which serves Westchester County just outside of New York City, since 2014. At the same time, she's been running her own boutique production company called Pope Productions. Kristen Pope joins me. Kristen, thanks for being on.
Hi there. Thanks for having me.
My pleasure. Glad to have you. I have so much to ask you because it's been nice to finally get a journalist on that can actually really talk about some good deep down issues. But I want to first learn about what you're doing. You just recently launched the On Air Academy. It's an online course to help aspiring and emerging journalists secure their job on air. And according to the website, you say this: you will walk away, quote, with the master keys to set an intentional vision, tell an award-winning story, compile a reel that gets the job, get hiring managers to notice you, join a professional network, and ultimately get the job.
That's it.
Talk to me about the syllabus. What does the course entail?
So the course entails working on your storytelling, making sure that you are an excellent storyteller, working on your reel. That is our portfolio. It's our calling card in this business. So making sure that your reel has the best elements to showcase you as a storyteller. Making a list, a very intentional list about the places that you want to work. Getting hooked up to a network. And making sure that you're a part of a professional network. And I encourage everyone to write a vision and to be clear about that vision, because for me, and for every professional, you come up on some hard times and, you have blocks in the road, and that vision helps to ground you and sustain you. And you should also write it in pencil because you need to be able to be flexible, like now. Now is a time that you need to be flexible, in a time where you need to allow for some adjustment, in how you're going to present yourself and what your next opportunity is going to look like.
I want to ask you now about your production company that you've been working with alongside your work in television news, Pope Productions. It creates culture-shaping storytelling content and coaches women to pivot through their career transitions. You hosted a program called The Positive Controversy with Kristen Pope to amplify voices not often heard in the media. Great guests you've had on. You've actually interviewed Reverend Al Sharpton, TV One's Roland Martin, former NAACP President Ben Jealous. You are entrenched into so many social, community, charitable efforts, Kristen. Talk to me about the obstacles you see from all your works that are often not often heard, as you say.
So I actually interviewed all of those gentlemen before I launched the show, but they were part of the catalyst that helped me to launch the show. I mean, how amazing is that? I was able to interview all of them prior to even starting my own show, and it gave me the courage to go ahead and launch out and do what I did. But I've been so fortunate. I mean, the very beginning, before I had gotten a full-time job, I was able to interview actors Lynn Whitfield and Blair Underwood, and then a couple of years later, the people that you mentioned. And so it's continued to encourage me that I'm in the right place and I'm doing the right thing. But more importantly, I love to connect with people, and they're people just like anybody else. And so everyone has a story to tell, and I want to be on the front lines of telling it.
And most importantly, as a journalist and just someone that's out there in the public, the networking that you're able to do, the kind of connections you can go ahead and bridge together that create other opportunities. And you are proof positive of that. So I think that's another thing I'm sure you probably teach the students and those that are around you. It's just a great example, and you're a great role model for that. Now, I want to ask you, now that I know about you and we've given a little context to the listeners, now I have to talk to you about journalism itself, the state of it today, and not so much necessarily. This was before the coronavirus confinement that we're dealing with ourselves right now as we record this program. I want to take a story that I took from Harvard Business Review. I think there's a couple of stories I took here that I pointed out to you that I think really cut through the narrative of what's going on of journalism today. I'm really curious what you would say about it. Harvard Business Review recently wrote this. I want to just read this passage real quick. It's a little bit lengthy, but I want to bring this up. They recently wrote this, quote, Local journalism is failing in the United States. A strong message there. Many of us learn in school that a free society requires a free press, but we rarely reflect on what it actually means to lose the fourth estate. Democracies need independent, fact-based journalism to provide a voice for a diverse range of people, to watch the powerful, and to keep members of a society informed. Study after study has found that without access to local news, people are less civically engaged and less likely to vote. The demise of local newspapers, which are still by far the main source of original reporting in their communities, is also linked to a rise in local corruption and an increase in polarization. As news consumers rely more on partisan-inflected national outlets for their information, does this just prove, Kristen, how deregulation and corporate culture are just bad news for journalists and the public as a whole?
I think that deregulation is dangerous to our journalism. Do I think it's just bad? I wouldn't use that language, but I think it's dangerous. Yes, I do. It's very important that you have the free press and that we not be subject to conglomerates. You see a lot of big companies buying up stations, and it does put limits on how free a news operation can be if they're beholden to certain regulations by either the government, the internet, or by some big conglomerate.
My thing is, the local component is really where I stand out with. For me, and I understand of a national media that if you're looking to go ahead and base yourself off of advertisers, you want to report to be able to bring the biggest audience possible. But there are, I believe, nefarious actors among those people that run those networks or those national outlets that are not serving in the interest. So the thing is, if you have politicians, if you have, big officials, before they become public and nationally known, they need to be vetted through the local end. I think that's what it comes down to. And I think when you're losing the resources, the manpower, the personnel, the reporters that can actually go ahead and vet through and screen everybody so that we always keep in track of any politicians that come up to the forefront or anybody that comes in that becomes a celebrity, anything like that, we get to learn and we get to, keep an eye on things. We again, it's serving the general interest of the public.
It is serving the general interest of the public, but I'd be interested in an example. Do you have a specific example of what you're talking about? When you talk about celebrities and things of that nature needing to be vetted, do you have a specific example that you could reference?
Well, I don't want to get into, the thing is, if I do, that would get me in a little bit of a political discussion, which I do not want to try to get into for the broadcast. My thing is, I just think that when it comes to radio stations, when they're not allowed to have minority owners or owners that are local based, you have people that are detached from the local community, that are not talking about things that are within the community that are of interest to the community. It's something else that they have brought on upon themselves. Does that make sense? Well,
when you say brought on themselves, I do believe that it is extremely important to have local representation in that particular locality. It's one of the reasons why I love local reporting, because who better to tell the stories of the local community than the person who lives there, or who dwells there, or who knows that, has taken time to get to know the people, versus someone who comes outside and is, not hardened to, but is unaware and uneducated of how that community operates, what is important to them. Reporting in a lot of different places, reporting from Abilene, Texas to New York, I had to really learn what a town like Abilene, Texas was all about. What stories matter to them? I think that's just being a good journalist. What stories matter to them? What their culture was. All of those things were important to build trust. I think this is getting into trust. How do you build trust with your viewers or your audience or whomever, and then build an authentic, trustworthy, integral relationship where the news is exactly that? It's important to have local representation.
Let me put it to you like this. In the coronavirus coverage we're seeing right now in New York City, the hospital situation, we are hearing a lot of what's being talked about. Obviously, there's not so much access to the hospitals themselves, which I'm sure that the TV stations would love to be able to have more access. But there have been a couple of discredited reports. First of all, you saw somebody within the hospital go ahead and take a picture of the refrigerated body bags. Yes, you're trying to get that the idea, that visual, to really create, a sense of the seriousness of the situation. Then there was this issue that had the CBS News put out a report where they showed an occupied hospital area with many beds being occupied by patients, but it was in fact a hospital in Italy when it was represented to be in New York City. Those kind of things do not serve the interest of the public. That's misinformation. I understand they want to show the file footage there just to create the sense of, here's what we're talking about, the seriousness of it. That's why you need to continue to keep watching us, because we're telling you this information. But it's the information we need, not the shock and awe. I feel like that's being portrayed right there. If it's there and you're actually seeing it. The other thing too is Elmhurst, New York, the hospital that's been also talked about in the news. I've seen local reporters that work for, national news outlets. They've gone to the ground, to the hospital itself, saying that all the reports of long lines for people being tested have not been. I've seen several sources like that. But then again, I don't see it reported by the media.
But I'm going to caution you, because at the same time, when you take those few reports as opposed to the data and what's real and what we see is happening, the death tolls going up, these rates going up, you know that the situation is not good. The situation is not under control. You have, well-respected doctors, people, Dr. Fauci, people like Bill Gates, who have been covering pandemics on a global scale for a long time, informing us of the mathematics of what this will end up being if it doesn't happen. I have people in my text message people who are losing loved ones every single day. It's coming closer and closer, to my dwelling because I'm hearing about it. And then, second to that, I've got friends who are in the medical field who are like, no, we don't have enough coverage. We don't have enough protective gear and things like that. New York sounds like ground zero. They're, turned Jacob Javits into a hospital, and hotels are being turned into a hospital. The situation is bad, and it hasn't even gotten as bad as it is. So I would caution us to take those few examples, and not turn that necessarily into the story or turn that into an extreme case, thereby taking our eyes off of the real problem.
Well, here's the thing I also want to make mention of. There's a lot of time, and this has been a trend I'm not seeing as much anymore. I don't know why, but a lot of local journalists, when you have all these networks that have affiliated stations, especially in New York City, you have great outlets. Obviously, you worked at a local outlet in New York City that served the public very well. So I don't see those reporters that are in there, have the connections to the hospitals, that are doing the beats of those reports. Instead of seeing the national reporters coming in after the fact, I don't know if any collaboration between like CBS and CBS New York, or Fox and Fox New York, or what have you. CNN I know has all news sources. I worked in television news. I worked in the field as a feed coordinator, as an editor. So I got to work the satellite feeds. I know the editing of that. So they all have affiliates they can go to that can be doing the reporting. Why don't they leave it to them to do the reports? Take the cameras there, sure, but let the local journalists that are actually getting the actual factual information get that instead of what's being done, and then just leave yourself to the national end. Stick with Washington, D.C., and stick with what the government officials are saying on that end. But when it comes to the hospitals, when it comes to the internal city-based, first responders, leave that to the local journalists. They're just as professional as anybody else to come on camera in a situation like this. Does that make sense?
I hear what you're saying, but at the same time, people are going to go to the national news to find out what's happening just as well as they're going to go to their local news. We need it in both places. There's no reason why you couldn't have a local reporter and a national reporter covering the same story. I've covered some national stories, and when you do, you have that long line of people all the way from News 12 all the way up into CNN covering the same story, because everyone is looking to be as up to date on the information as possible. And people trust who they trust. At the end of the day, you got people and they channel surf, people are turning from News 12 to CNN to MSNBC, back to News 12, back to, that's why you have the variety, because people can tune in to whom they want when they want.
I want to go and move. Trust is a great point here, and I'm going to bring it across. And again, Kristen, just so you know, I like the show to try to be as apolitical as possible. So, for me, I'm independent. I'm not looking to go ahead and put it either side. My whole thing is just that in a journalistic sense, I want things reported right. I want who, what, when, where, and why to be questions asked on the news front. Opinion editorial should be clearly defined and identified on the other side. But do you see at any point at all, do you think there is a little bit of collusion where that is getting mixed up right now, that we're not seeing a clear opinion editorial and news in our news coverage?
Well, opinion editorial and news coverage is a bit different, shared by the fact that we're saying opinion. What we need at this time, I mean, there are a lot of op-eds being printed, as they should be, because it gives perspective and people are living it in real time. But at the same time, you need facts. You need the facts, and I absolutely want to see my local news. And then I want to see the national news too, because I know that the national news is going to talk about some things that the local news won't talk about. They're going to talk about it, from a wider umbrella. But do you need your local news 150%? Because I need to know and especially because, I know you don't want to get political, but we're not handling this on a worldwide federal level. There's not some federal stay in shelter. It's by your state's locality, sometimes by your city. So we need for the journalists to be out there getting the facts on every locality.
So, Kristen, we talked about trust. That what you mentioned it just as we were still talking about this. So I want to refer to a story that I brought back from last October. I talked to another guest about this, and she worked in health science reporter for local and national television. Foreignpolicy.com wrote a story, and this is what was asked. And this is, again, where there should be trust, but let's be honest, the public we're seeing in polling is not offering that kind of trust. They're losing. There's a lack of trust. So pollsters have asked Americans whether they trust the news they read, listen to, or watch. The answer is increasingly negative. And the sentiment is, in fact, common now all over the world. Growing rates of global internet access have made countless sources of information readily available, but with a few checks and balances and widely varying levels of credibility. Unprecedented access to all kinds of media has not only increased competition among news providers, but it has also led to the extreme proliferation of low-quality yet plausible-looking sources of information, making it easier for political players to manipulate public opinion and to do so while denigrating established news brands. No disrespect to journalists in general, of which there are some that are very honorable in their work and should be given their respect. I'm saying that out front, disclaiming myself. But, Kristen, should we be starting to dissuade the public from consuming mainstream media when all they do for the most part is they're putting out attention bait or clickbait?
Absolutely not. I think that's very, very dangerous to dissuade people from the mainstream media, because most of what we're consuming is fact checked. Most of it, I, having worked in the news media, know that most of it is being sourced. Most of it is being checked against, 2 and 3 times. But to dissuade people from it, I think is very dangerous, because you have all of these other sources that are not fact checked.
But what about the fact we have sources that many times, I can't mention how many times I see it, but how many times do we have to have an anonymous source that cannot disclose anything more? And we can't, and they might be fact checked according to the internal source there, that reporter, that journalist, that outlet, but they're anonymous. And that's happening too much. That was a thing where National Enquirer would say a pal would do this and this or say this and this. But then again, it's insubstantiated, isn't it?
Well, I don't think it's unsubstantiated necessarily. I prefer to stay away from a story where you can't name the person or, but in times like this where people are concerned for their jobs, and we have to put it into context. When we say many times, what does that mean? When we say anonymous source, what is the context of that? I used to go to Black neighborhoods where the young men could have helped to uncover the answer to a story, but they didn't want to get on air because they always felt like, they might be targeted against, depending on a particular neighborhood and things like that. And so, there is some distrust of the media, absolutely, but I do think we have to put it in context. And I don't think it's helpful that you have a president who is always calling out fake news.
Okay.
That's just a reality. We may not get into a political conversation, but you cannot have this conversation without addressing that. I'm watching on television as he's berating the members of the news media, Yamiche Alcindor, he's berating her, he's berating other people. how are American people, if the president of the United States would do something like that, why wouldn't we have a movement or a culture shift where people don't trust the news?
But see, I don't know. I think the focus is too ultra. I think it's too ultra focused on the president is what I think. I'm worried about what the CDC is doing. I'm worried about the FDA. I'm worried about what the National Institute of Health. I'm worried about what the World Health Organization is doing. We're talking about a diplomatic leader. And listen, I mean, regardless, things are being done. I mean, I think we can at least agree there are things that are being done. We're seeing hospitals, the military hospitals that have been shipped to Los Angeles and New York City, where we're seeing multiple field hospitals being built by the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers has come in to fortify, numerous beds. Ventilators are being shipped and processed and manufactured. The efforts are being made regardless of what is being said by the person at the top. I just think I think that ultra hyper focus on the president and every word that he says, regardless of what he's saying and if it's credible or not, I think that takes away from everything else. Don't you think?
I think it actually is dangerous if you can't trust what the president says and you have to dumb down the power of his word. I think that's dangerous, because if that means that his words are now invalid or are now, maybe we shouldn't pay so much attention to him. Like, what world are we living in when the president of the United States' words and voice do not carry substantial weight? That's a problem.
But as a journalist, are you hearing more people telling you this is what they want to hear? They would rather hear about what the president is not saying or is saying incorrectly, as opposed to finding out if my local Walmart, if Walmart's all over the country, if employees are going to get hazard pay, or if the stores are going to be open, if the supply chains are still rampant and all supplies can be made available, so essential items can be made to the rest of the country. Wouldn't that be more important story? I think the focus, that's what I'm saying. The focus, I'm not saying that there shouldn't be any focus on the president. I just think the focus of the stories should be much more on everything else. There's 90% of the more things more important than the president, in my opinion.
This is why we have to keep it in context. The damage of the president had been done for years. He's been in that position for 3 years. We're just now talking about the coronavirus. President Trump has been lambasting the news for years. So now you do that, you tear down a whole institution, and then when we need the news to inform us of what's going on, now nobody trusts it. Now we're questioning it. But that damage had already been done.
But how does that help people that are looking to find jobs or that are unemployed now and looking for the next paycheck? I'm just trying to figure out. I mean, I'm being sincere about this. What does what the president say have to do with what people are suffering with day to day right now at their kitchen table?
It should have everything to do with it. He should be doing everything he can. Every word that comes out of his mouth should be to the benefit and to the help of the United States of America's people. Every word that he says. But if the words are contrary to that, then, where do you look? I guess you just look to your local government, and that's a good thing. You need to have a great relationship with your local government. But if the words coming out of the president's mouth don't help the situation, don't make you feel any more secure if he's the one who's running the country, that's a problem.
Okay. Let's stop for a second. Only because I know that my next few questions are going to be I'm going to still keep going, but the thing is, if you don't feel, my thing is just, I like the healthy debate. That's fine. But I also feel like I don't want to make it where, like, if you feel like there's a point where if I'm asking questions and you feel like that you don't feel good about what I'm asking you, I don't want to go ahead and hold you to these questions if it's not. I appreciate you answering, but it's just my whole thing is I'm trying to keep this away from being political, and I feel like it is, and I don't want it to be that way. And I want to just be able to have it where we could talk more about journalism itself and not go into a part about the president. Like, I know everybody wants to go to that route, and I appreciate where you're coming from. I really do. But my whole thing is, I don't want to be. I'm trying to avoid that discussion. Do you see where I'm coming from?
I do, but some of your questions, it's inevitable. The first thing you talked about was the fourth estate of democracy. That's a government. We're talking about things that are, That's a federal government discussion. The free press is a constitutional right. That's a political question.
I mean, anybody can say what they want about.
Let's just be straight up now. That's a political question. If you ask me about the free press, which is the constitutional right, that's a political question.
But politics don't need to be a part of this, a part of journalism. But politics is a section of journalism, not the overall factor. I'm going to say I can appreciate where you're coming from when it comes in regards to the Fourth Estate and when it comes to what our national leaders, how they respond and how they are, and based on all past history of any administration. Okay. But my thing is just that I am afraid that politics are becoming way too entrenched into everything that's being done into journalism. I think there's issues from my end, I am trying to go, in defense of content creators, of journalists like you. My thing is I want things to be done so that everything is cleared away for the lack of, so if there is political correctness that become part of the narrative of any particular news or information or entertainment or what have you, if there's issues where social justice or just race, diversity, equality, inclusion, I support all those areas, and maybe I just support them differently than others. But I think politics are getting infiltrated way too much into our journalism, and that's where I'm coming from with that. That's why I really appreciate you coming on. Obviously, it's a healthy debate that we should have, but we might have some differing opinions, and that's okay. So I want to bring another point across to you. And honestly, like I said, I think you got very strong opinions, and I appreciate that. I really do. I'm going to go and keep going here. Another point from foreignpolicy.org, which I believe is bipartisan. I don't think there's any particular slant to them at all. But there's a point that I want to mention that bears repeating again. And this is something I really do believe in. I just want to get what you think of this yourself. Mm-hmm. So the world's, quote, new digital and highly competitive media environment has created fundamental problems in the business models that journalism relies on. Print products are in terminal decline. Television audiences are plummeting. Advertising around news is no longer attractive when internet giants like Google, Facebook, and Amazon offer far more effective ways to target consumers. These new financial realities have led many news organizations to adopt problematic techniques for survival, prioritizing quantity over quality and running so-called clickbait headlines. Each of these developments, combined with a lack of transparency within news organizations and the increased use of unfiltered social media platforms as news sources, contributes to a further drop in the trust in media. As we're recording in this coronavirus outbreak, are you concerned at all about the amount of hysteria and misinformation that might be being reported by some fellow journalists at the behest of their superiors?
Yes. And by that, I mean, I am concerned about moving too quick, moving too fast. I think in a lot of ways, sometimes news organizations unfortunately prioritize first versus right because they have to stay on top of the very fast news cycle, and they're competing, like you said, against social media and other tools and techniques. So that is concerning. And because this information is life or death for people, it has to be right. And the truth of the matter is it matters more to be right than it does to be first.
One other point I want to make from this foreign policy article is called "The Internet Broke the News Industry and Can Fix It Too." So again, more constructive, less critical. That's what I'm always about. Quote, "The first priority of any news outlet must be the quality and credibility of its journalistic work. Those that depend on advertising only business models may find it hard to sustain this priority. Eventually, a push for more traffic and therefore revenue will conflict with the mission of high quality and reliable journalism." So what should journalists say to their superiors? What should be done to curb this clickbait issue? Because what does need to be done? Because you acknowledge as well, there is some distrust by the public. What can be done to turn this around? Because whatever's being done right now, there's a slippery slope.
You're right. And I do believe that reporters need more editorial control over their stories. I believe, and that has to be part of the person and when they're hired. Journalists need more editorial control.
Now, editorial control, do you mean more in terms of being able to inject opinion or being able to diversify what stories they report on that are more important to the public?
Well, not necessarily opinion. I want to stay away from that because opinion and fact are two different things. Definitely for more diversity for what news gets pushed out, that's for certain. But also to be able to raise their voice and say, hey, I think we need to do this different. Hey, I think we need to push back on this. Hey, this angle isn't showing up. Maybe we should change it to this, and be supported and be trusted by their news organization. I think that is extremely important.
This is a tough subject to talk about. But and this is not an easy subject to talk about. It's not something that's going to get corrected overnight. I totally understand that. But I've seen this change. And the internet's really, it's the disruption of the media itself, because the internet has changed everything. I think the foreign policy article says exactly that. It has affected every portion of media in different ways. And it's amazing to see that. But, one of the things that should not change, but I think, just overall, I just think what foreign policy said is not that far off. I just think that there are certain things where money is getting in the way of accurate journalism. Because, for me, I started in the radio, and I know, I wasn't in it to make a whole lot of money. I just knew that it was a place to be theater of the mind. I could be informative, educational, or, entertaining at all the same time. And it was some place where you could really build your craft and be something more. And news, I also appreciated the same way, writing for newspapers and working for TV news. I could appreciate what we're doing, but I also knew that, I would be contentious with the producers because because the, news director has a different agenda. I'm like, why are we doing these stories? Why are we doing this? And why are we being lazy about it? And I'm not saying everybody does it. I'm not saying you do, but there are not enough investigative journalists out there. There are not enough reporters that have the resources, the wherewithal to go out and find the story, not take Twitter feeds and report it as news. That is not serving the public to me. I keep hammering that, and I can't help it. It does bother me. So I'll have more of my interview with Kristen L. Pope next week here on the Broadcasters Podcast. In the meantime, I want to go ahead and give you a little heads up of future episodes I have coming up and some guests I'm going to have on. Coming up in future episodes, I'm going to have American model, actress, and producer Rachel Mullins. Started her career at the age of 12. She produced and directed a feature-length documentary called You Slut. She's now the host of the podcast No Filter Friday on Public House Media. We talked to her about all that she's done in her career and also the work in television. I speak with comedian and TV host Kevin Goatee. He's the CEO of Monkey Butt Productions. Hosts Comics Watching Comics on Amazon Video, and Fantasy Football Jibber Jabber, available on Facebook and YouTube, and hosts a podcast called Gutting the Sacred Cow. I also talked to Donnie O'Malley, who is the founder of a video-on-demand service for military veterans called Vet TV. And I also talked with Hall of Fame broadcaster from radio, The Morning Mayor, originally came from Phoenix, Arizona, is based in Phoenix, Arizona still today, running Star Worldwide Networks, a large syndicator and digital marketing agency and podcast radio provider. Dave Pratt, I'll have him on the show as well. Also talk with photographer, video producer, and YouTube video blogger Jim Costa. And I'm still lining up a few more guests to bring on the program in coming weeks. So I'll have all that coming up for you on future episodes here on the Broadcasters Podcast. Take a look for that. Let's go into the headlines this week. There's quite a few. So we talked last week about the AMC theaters and all the issues that were going on with that. So a few good and bad things that are coming out of that. Let's talk about what I have good for you first. Things that's on the bad side is Cinemark, who is a larger chain of movie theaters. Their credit rating has been downgraded over extended cinema closures. They're the third largest domestic cinema chain. They're following the same thing that happened with AMC theaters, where their credit rating dropped significantly. So they have 345 sites that have been closed since March 16th. At the moment, Cinemark has $488.3 million in cash on its balance sheet as of December 2019. And right now, they have drawn $98.8 million of availability under its revolving credit line on March 25th of this year. So the ratings company called Fitch, they believe that they have adequate runway to fund the company's operations at the end of 2020. So they're going to probably be able to survive. So people are looking at that. Meanwhile, AMC is looking at a possible Chapter 11 bankruptcy filing. So that's what's bigger things that are going on right now. So at the moment, the stock is being downgraded to a sell, according to many Wall Street analysts. And its cash burn rate is in a no-revenue environment running at $155 million a month. They're losing that much money without movies going on. And they were probably looking to go ahead and try to make real money off the blockbuster movies coming up during the summer and make their way back. So that's a bigger problem. The other thing also is they have a Chinese conglomerate called Dalian Wanda Group, which owns a majority voting stake. They're looking ways to reduce costs. They furloughed all 600 corporate employees, including the CEO, in late March, and has already cut its dividend by 85%. So they're working on it. They're trying to get themselves through. In their situation, AMC right now, at the end of 2019, $265 million of cash on hand, $332 million available in credit lines for $600 million. So with that, AMC is only going to be able to keep liquid until June or July at the latest. So they will have to go bankrupt in the next 4 months, roughly. April, May, June, July. So we'll have to see where they're going to go on right now. And the problem is they also had a problem last year where they had a 26% box office decline. Or actually, that was domestically, the whole box office, 26%. And that's where they are at that. So they're struggling right now. Movie theaters, having a place to go watch the movies at, if it's not at home, is, you know, there's some issues, some things we need to keep an eye on. As for the box office itself, well, they're saying this. The best case scenario is that the box office is going to drop 40% this year. So if the theaters are closed for 3 months, domestic grosses may hit $7 billion, which is a 20-year low. So we're looking at different movies at the moment. For the time being, movie-going should return to normal levels by mid-July. At the moment, Christopher Nolan's Tenet is sticking to a release date of July 17th. Mulan from Disney Pictures, or from Disney, will be coming out, it says, July 24th. And Wonder Woman 1984 has been pushed from early June to August 14th. So they're all guessing mid-July, people will get to go back to the theaters. And how they're going to get to go back, we don't know yet. But we need a deadline to find out how that's going to work. Last year, box office at a 26% decline was $11.4 billion. So domestic revenue is estimated to come in at $6.82 billion if all 5,400 theaters stateside stay shuttered for a full 3 months, with traffic returning to normal levels immediately. But if there's a slow build of traffic for people going back, it will be more of about $6.3 million. So some people are hoping for a 2-month closure, which if it's a 2-month closure, AMC has a chance to get back, and will still be at a loss, but might be able to recoup and might be able to get themselves back on board. Same thing goes for the rest of the movie theaters. They might have a chance to stay around. Now, as a result, all these movies that are being pushed off to next year, that's F9, Jungle Cruise, The Eternals, Minions, The Rise of Gru, the next Ghostbusters installment, that's $1.8 million expected of lost revenue this year domestically. That's where things are right now. Plus, for the worldwide box office, China has had movie theaters closed since the end of January. Supposedly they had opened some back, but then they closed them once again. And that's where we are with all of this. And there are some movies that are now moving their way into home entertainment. Universal's Trolls World Tour is getting a lot of push right now to get moved over. That's coming up too. And then Disney's Artemis Fowl are 2 exceptions. Those are heading over. But now here's what's going on. And then what will help out afterwards to get people to come back to the movies? Well, in the fall, we'd have A Quiet Place 2 and Top Gun Maverick scheduled for Christmas weekend. So we're keeping an eye on all this. We'll keep an eye on all of it. Moving along. Let's talk about the movies that are on demand right now. First off, just as an example, Disney's. I keep saying Disney's. No, Birds of Prey. Okay. Harley Quinn and the Fabulous Emancipation of Harley Quinn, or whatever. Birds of Prey, the Fabulous Emancipation of Harley Quinn. Is that what it was called, right? And then they changed it to DC Birds of Prey to change it up in the theaters. So now the pricing for video on demand has changed up. 2 weeks after Birds of Prey debuted on home entertainment, they had it originally for $19.99 as a premium price. It's now the rental has been brought down 2 months after its theatrical premiere to $5.99. So the company, Warner Brothers, initially allowed downloads as well as rentals for the premium price, but said it would be a lower rental sometime in April. But unlike other releases, they did it after 2 weeks. So the company might be making an attempt to get a quick cash flow when other revenue is limited. But then it's also possible we're seeing the new rules evolve in real time. So maybe it's because of the fact that people are not expecting, no one's going to go ahead and pay $20 for a movie right now. Not at home. You're not paying for the experience. You're not paying for the nice seats. You're not paying for the whole experience. I wouldn't pay for that much. On top of that, you don't have the sound. You don't have the visual, the whole look of it. It's a different story. You just don't have that. And you don't have it in a home theater. Not at all. That's what it comes down to. And then you also have those movies that are separated out, which tells you when they're separated out and they're isolated to be new movies that you're going to go to the theater to go see, they become much more important. They get more value. But putting them in, wedged in with other movies out there, like older movies or other things, people are going to go and watch something else. They're not necessarily going to go and watch something new at home. Because I don't think a lot of people really think like that. Not necessarily. Anyways. Now, another story that's been talked about was the idea of getting software for cinemas' own streaming services. So the cinemas could actually get their own streaming services on board to make up for the lost revenue. That's another thought that's being brought out there. So many exhibitors are turning to digital options. So now, here's what's going on. There's a new partnership in place between Screen Plus and Vista Group, which will enable exhibitors that haven't already done so to launch their own personal VOD platforms and offer films directly to their customers for at-home streaming. The partnership will launch Screen Plus's VOD solution in every major territory, and Vista Group, its technology and software solutions currently service more than 50% of cinema chains worldwide, including Cineworld and Regal, Landmark, Odeon, Curzon, and View. So the idea is to bring the Screen Plus solution to exhibition customers for some time. And now with the outbreak of COVID-19, it allows an acceleration of the release of the product to the exhibition market. Now, Screen Plus has already worked with South by Southwest for press and industry to view this year's entries, as well as festivals. And it has powered markets for several years, including the Cannes Film Festival, Marcha du Film, the South by Southwest Film Festival, and the AFM. So taking a product that's already been out there and using it for mainstream full release of movies. I don't know what they're going to make off of that, but that's something that's very interesting. We'll keep an eye on that too. Nielsen Media Research has come out with some good stats. Video streaming has soared 85% in the U.S. in the first 3 weeks of March. This is back from March 31st, but I ain't got a chance to get to this on the show. But TV was up. Number of minutes streamed to TV was 400 billion minutes, up 85% compared to 2019. That's huge. March 16th, the week of March 16th, when everything changed and we had the actual national declaration of emergency, that went up 22% from the previous year. Almost 2 times as much. That's where we are. And the biggest share of video streaming on TV among the services, 29% of all streaming minutes viewed was by Netflix, 20% by YouTube, 10% by Hulu, and 9% by Amazon Prime Video. And that's where we're at. Now, looking at television, broadcast networks scrambled to program an uncertain future. And here's what's going on. I've talked about this with some people. that we're definitely seeing how people are now, they're going to feel a little more comfortable seeing this from home atmosphere on some of their programming. Do we really need the studios, the stages, as they're always set with everybody all glammed up? Are we going to take that back once again? Are we going to accept it as much? Are we going to not feel like, okay, so you're going back to the way it was and that's it? Like, so I think some people are very interested and they're really concerned about it. So now, broadcast networks are experiencing widespread ratings gains because of the quarantine. And so executives behind the scenes, are scrambling to plan for uncertain future with their production pipelines frozen through at least the end of April. So one executive tells the Hollywood Reporter, quote, scheduling is all about having the right pieces of the puzzle in front of you, how to put them together to generate the highest rating. It's impossible to do that when you don't know when all the pieces are. So as we mentioned, all these scripted series that aired this spring and unscripted offerings expected to fall this summer, all the major networks are weighing their options. They can move forward with whatever inventory is already actually ready, or save it for a fall schedule that, should the quarantine stretch into summer, could be devoid of first-run episodes. So many who could only speak on the condition of anonymity, given the rapidly changing nature of our current world, say have found themselves prepping for multiple timelines. Now, some of the things that are happening, people are looking at some of the from-home specials. There was Garth Brooks and Trisha Yearwood's concert on CBS, Fox and iHeartRadio's Concert for America, that igniting bidding wars across the broadcast networks. And then there's an NBC-led cross-global network event being rumored in the works. And then one more that can be stripped across multiple networks. And then also, the Big Four are also circling foreign acquisitions, like ABC did with their Canadian cop drama Rookie Blue. They would be doing, as they did during a potential writer strike. So the strategy historically failed to yield big ratings, but these types of shows are cheap, more important, complete. And in fact, at least one of the Big Four has already committed to a foreign pickup. And we've seen that before. That's nothing new. So multiple networks are starting to meet with their corporate siblings to figure out the respective cable and streaming ecosystems for content that can line fall schedules should the production shutdown stretch beyond the summer. So the annual premiere week in September, all the networks have started conversations with their streaming counterparts to see if any originals from Disney Plus, Hulu, CBS All Access, or even Peacock may be available to air on linear networks. So instead of making them exclusive to the streaming, make it exclusive as well to people watching on network TV. So yeah, they're going to go ahead and, cannibalize the other products they have with their content because, well, that's all they're going to be able to do. So another option multiple networks is looking at is to take a page from late night and repackage repeats with new content that appeals to diehard fans. So ABC recently announced a Flashback Friday for its long-running soap General Hospital, with introductions to classic episodes. And ABC is looking to air themed repeats, including a best of Dancing with the Stars or some of its other franchises. But then they also said if the shutdown lasts for more months, one executive suggests that this will be moot. If that happens, it'll be all news all the time. So they also break down by network. I'm not going to talk much about that. One of the things we know, the NBC was really relying on 85 hours of the Olympics. Well, that's not going to happen until next year. And there's other shows they have, but again, I'm not going to go into all that. It's just saying that's where we're at. Two more stories. I'm going to wrap things up. Nile Rodgers, he recently had an interview talking about his production and his philosophy and why he's learned to embrace failure. So if you didn't know, he is the major producer, the founder of Chic and the Chic organization. They're the people that were really behind so many different records, especially in the late 70s, for themselves, putting out several number one albums, several number one singles, and for several years they were on top of their game. And then after that, Nile Rodgers would continue to produce for several artists. He was part of producing a number of top hits, including David Bowie's biggest selling LP, Let's Dance, in 1983, which sold over 10 million units, and Madonna's Like a Virgin in 1984, over 20 million units. He also worked with Duran Duran and so many others. One thing he actually mentioned, and this is some of the things I actually thought was very interesting. So Nile Rodgers was asked, what would your advice be to a young producer just starting out now? He says, quote, I think the main thing for me, I don't know if this goes across the board, but I believe that you need to learn to embrace failure. If you embrace failure, that means you love what you're doing and you will continue to do it, hit or miss. You'll still continue to do it because you love it. I thought that little point was nice and poignant. I actually really did enjoy that. He was also given the best piece of advice that was ever given, and from whom he said he had a very strict jazz guitar tutor. He told me that any song on the top 40 is a great composition. I said, are you kidding me? I started singing Sugar, Sugar by the Archies, and I said, you call that a great composition? He said, absolutely. I asked him, why would you say something so absurd? He said, oh, you think that's absurd? That record's been number 1 for 3 or 4 weeks now. Are you telling me that those millions and millions of people who put it there are wrong and you, Nile Rodgers, are right? And that he said what he was saying is that as an artist, your main job is to communicate with people. And at that time, Sugar Sugar was doing that better than any other record. 2 weeks later, he actually wrote the song that would really catapult Chic to the mainstream, Everybody Dance. Pretty interesting. I actually like that. I like Nile Rodgers anyway. I like a lot of his music. He also did help resurrect Diana Ross's career post Supremes in the early 80s. And a lot of great work. There's just some people that just have that. And, as we know today, producers are much more heralded than ever before. And we're going to leave it there for another Broadcasters Podcast. I really do appreciate all of you listening in. Remember to come in next week and check out part 2 of my interview with Kristen L. award-winning broadcast journalist. We'll continue our conversation on the overall state of journalism. We'll have that coming back for you next week here on the Broadcasters Podcast. Until then, remember, content is king, and the control of your content is in your hands.
Thank you for listening to the Broadcasters Podcast, presented by broadcasterspodcast.com and kingofpodcasts.com. The Broadcasters Podcast is brought to you by kingofpodcasts.com/Amazon. If Amazon is good enough for the King of Podcasts, it most certainly is good for you. kingofpodcasts.com/Amazon. And don't forget to check out the King of Podcasts wrestling program, The Wrestling is Real Podcast, exclusively at kingofpodcasts.com.